It's one of the longest, loudest arguments in modern history, a fight that outlived revolution, toppled empires, bankrupted superpowers, and split the world in half. For over a century, capitalism and socialism weren't just economic theory. They were battle lines. And behind every patriotic speech, every worker uprising, every recession, and every proxy war, this debate shaped the world we live in. But here's the part no ideology influencer ever mentioned. Neither system worked the way the textbooks promised. Not once, not anywhere. And when the pressure hit, war, famine, inflation, collapse, the truth showed itself with brutal clarity. Welcome to Stories Behind the Money, where power, ambition, and history collide, and every fortune has a hidden cost. The story begins long before anyone uttered the words capitalism or socialism. For most of human history, the economy wasn't really an economy at all. It was survival. Monarchs claimed divine right. Landlords owned almost everything. Peasants produced just enough to avoid starving. Progress moved slower than glaciers. For thousands of years, human life was a zero-sum game. If someone rose, someone else fell. Wealth came from land, labor, and war. Productivity barely grew. And the idea that ordinary people might grow rich through trade or innovation would have sounded like madness. Then the Industrial Revolution blew the world open. Britain in the late 1700s was a pressure cooker of coal, iron, capital, and restless ambition. Machines replaced muscle, factories replaced workshops, and a new kind of power emerged, the power of private capital. For the first time, individuals could invest, risk, and own at a scale previously reserved for king. Productivity exploded. Wages rose for some, misery deepened for others, and inequality widened faster than any society had ever experienced. Pollution choked cities. Children worked 12-hour shifts. Slums bred disease. But no matter how ugly it was, one fact was undeniable. Capitalism produced more goods, more wealth, more speed than the world had ever seen. This was the moment when socialism was born, not as a utopian dream, but as a desperate reaction to industrial capitalism's brutality. By the mid-1800s, writers like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels looked at the smokestacks, the worker riots, the factory floors stained with sweat and blood, and concluded that the system itself was the crime. They saw capitalist wealth as stolen labor, extraction disguised as opportunity. They argued that if workers collectively owned the factories, if the profits were shared, if production served human need rather than private gain, society would finally become fair. No more exploitation, no more cycles of boom and bust, just rational planning and equal dignity. It sounded clean, elegant, moral, and for millions of people living beneath the gears of early capitalism, it sounded like justice. But theory is one thing, real life is another. The first time the world seriously attempted socialism on a national scale, it wasn't in a classroom, it was in the ashes of an empire. After the 1917 Russian Revolution, Lenin inherited a country that was starving, illiterate, and backward. The Tsar was dead. The old elite fled or were executed. And suddenly, a vast territory with 150 million people needed a new operating system. So, the Soviets built one. State ownership of land, factories, banks, and resources. Prices were set by bureaucrats. Production targets replaced profit motive. Private business was wiped out. In theory, it should have created perfect equality and efficiency. In practice, it created chaos. Without market prices, planners didn't know what people wanted or how much to produce. Without competition, factories didn't innovate. Without personal reward, workers had no reason to exceed the minimum. Shortages became normal, lines became culture, and agriculture, the backbone of the Russian economy, collapsed into famine. Lenin eventually retreated, allowing limited private trade just to keep the country alive. Yet something strange happened. Despite its failures, socialism remained seductive. Because capitalism wasn't exactly looking good either. By the early 20th century, capitalism had delivered immense growth, but also wild instability. Speculation ran rampant. Trusts dominated industry. The wealthy lived like modern royalty while millions scraped by. The system was efficient at creating wealth, but terrible at distributing it. This imbalance detonated in 1929 when the U.S. stock market imploded and capitalism suffered its most catastrophic failure. The Great Depression wasn't a recession. It was a global economic heart attack. Banks collapsed. Unemployment hit 25%. Entire countries saw their financial systems wiped out. For millions of observers, capitalism looked not just flawed, but fatal. So by the 1930s, the world faced an uncomfortable truth. Neither system worked as advertised. Socialism promised equality, but delivered scarcity. Capitalism promised promised prosperity but delivered collapse. And then came a moment that changed everything. World War II. The war forced every major economy to test its system under maximum pressure. The Soviet Union, despite its inefficiencies, mobilized its entire population with terrifying speed and discipline. State control allowed it to redirect all resources toward survival. Meanwhile, capitalist nations like the United States transformed into industrial supermachines, proving just how powerful private innovation could be when backed by national coordination. When the war ended, the scoreboard wasn't ideological anymore. It was GDP, infrastructure, growth, and living standards. And from 1945 to 1991, the world became a laboratory. On one side, the Soviet bloc, central planning, state control, suppressed market. On the other, the United States and its allies regulated capitalism, private enterprise, but with safety nets born from Depression-era lessons. This was the real experiment, not the manifestos, not the speeches, but millions of people living the consequences. The results were as dramatic as they were painful. In the Soviet Union, the early decades brought rapid industrialization. Illiteracy fell, housing expanded, military power soared. But beneath the surface, the system was cracking. Without price signals, the economy drifted into absurd inefficiency. Factories met quotas by producing unusable goods, farms delivered rotten harvests, and innovation stagnated. By the 1970s, the USSR was decades behind in consumer technology. A country that could build rockets couldn't produce decent refrigerators. Capitalism, meanwhile, adapted. After the Great Depression, governments introduced regulation, deposit insurance, antitrust laws, social security, public healthcare systems, and unemployment benefits. Capitalism didn't become fair, but it became survivable. It learned from its mistakes, and that adaptability became its ultimate weapon. By the 1980s, the gap was undeniable. Western living standards surged, while the Soviet economy stalled. The Cold War wasn't won by ideology, it was won by performance. By the time the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, the debate seemed settled. The Soviet Union wasn't defeated by bombs or invasion. It was defeated by empty shelves, broken incentives, and an economy that could no longer keep up. A system designed to eliminate inequality had produced new elites, party bosses, bureaucrats, and insiders, while ordinary citizens waited in line for bread. A system built to transcend market chaos collapsed under the weight of its own rigid planning. And when the numbers finally came in, they told a blunt story. Western economies were simply more productive, more innovative, and more adaptable. But capitalism's victory lap didn't last long, because while the Cold War ended, the economic contradictions didn't. By the 1990s and 2000s, capitalism evolved again, this time into something no 19th century theorist could have predicted. Finance exploded, global supply chains stretched across continents, and credit flowed like water. Inequality soared again, this time on a scale reminiscent of the Gilded Age. Corporations became transnational power, and entire economies became dependent on debt, speculation, and asset bubble. The 2008 financial crisis hit like a déjà vu, a reminder that capitalism's instability never really disappeared. It just came back wearing new clothes. Meanwhile, socialism reemerged, not in the old Soviet form, but as something softer, more nostalgic. Calls for wealth taxes, nationalized health care, free education, stronger union, and economic leveling returned. In many countries, younger generations, crushed by housing costs and stagnant wages, began to question whether capitalism still worked for anyone but the wealthy. The debate was reborn, but there was a twist. This time, almost nobody wanted pure capitalism or pure socialism, because history had made the trade-offs painfully clear. Look at modern Scandinavia, often mislabeled as socialist. These countries have free markets, private enterprise, and global corporations. But they also have high taxes, strong social protections, and powerful unions. It's capitalism, with guardrails, a mixed economy engineered to dampen inequality while preserving innovation. Now look at the United States, a capitalist powerhouse with tremendous invention, financial depth, and global influence, but also staggering wealth gaps, decaying infrastructure, unaffordable healthcare, and a shrinking middle class. Look at China, the most fascinating case of all. The world's largest authoritarian capitalist economy. Beijing calls it socialism with Chinese characteristics, but what it really resembles is state-directed capitalism. Private firms driving growth, government controlling strategic sectors, markets allowed to flourish only when they serve national priorities. And yet, even China faces the same contradiction. Debt-driven growth, housing bubbles, demographic demographic decline, slowing productivity. When you step back, the truth is almost embarrassing in its simplicity. Every major economy today is a hybrid, a blend of markets and state power, incentives and protections, freedom and control. Not because ideologies fail, but because reality forced compromise. When systems met real human behavior, ambition, greed, fear, laziness, creativity. Neither theory held up cleanly, and that's the uncomfortable lesson. Economic systems don't shape people nearly as much as people shape economic systems. Human nature doesn't disappear under socialism or capitalism. It just expresses itself differently. Under pure capitalism, greed becomes innovation until it becomes exploitation. Under pure socialism, equality becomes unity until it becomes repression. In markets, power concentrates through wealth. In planned economies, power concentrates through politics. Different systems, same human tendencies, different propaganda, same flaws. The real question isn't which system is better, it's which system has the best mechanism to restrain power, correct mistakes, and reward useful behavior. And history's answer is clear. The system that adapts wins. Capitalism survived because it could reinvent itself, from laissez-faire to the New Deal, to globalized finance, to tech capitalism. Socialism collapsed where it refused to evolve. The Soviet Union, Maoist China, North Korea. But socialism thrived where it merged with markets, Scandinavia, post-1978 China, despite its authoritarian edge, and parts of Western Europe. Ideology didn't decide the winners. Adaptation did. To understand why, you don't need a PhD in economics. You just need to see what each system prioritizes. Capitalism prioritizes incentive. When it works, well, it unleashes creativity, risk-taking, and productivity. People build, innovate, experiment, because there's something in it for them. But the downside is inequality, instability, and cycles that punish the vulnerable. Socialism prioritizes equality. When it works, well, it reduces poverty, expands access, and ensures basic dignity. But without incentives, productivity stagnates. Without markets, information collapses. And without open institutions, corruption festers in silence. Both systems have strengths, both have failure, and both have historical scars. The modern world, the world you and I live in, is built on those scars. Every safety net, every regulation, every market rule, every welfare program, every financial instrument carries the DNA of this century-long battle. The mixed economies we live in today aren't proof that one system won. They're proof that neither system could survive alone. But here's the twist most people miss. The debate is shifting again because the challenges of the 21st century, AI, disruption, demographic collapse, climate risk, energy transitions, global debt, don't care about ideology. They expose weaknesses in both systems. Market capitalism struggles with long-term planning and social cohesion. Socialist planning struggles with flexibility and innovation. And the countries that will thrive in the next century will be those that combine the two most effectively. The creativity of markets with the resilience of public investment, private innovation with public direction, freedom with stability. If the last century taught us anything, it's this. No system works without guardrail. No economy survives without incentives. And no society thrives when wealth or power becomes too concentrated, whether in billionaires or bureaucrats. History didn't choose capitalism or socialism. History chose whatever prevented collapse. And every generation has to renegotiate that balance. Because the debate was never really about capitalism versus socialism, it was about who controls the levers inside each system. The capital, the state, the banks, the unions, the corporation, the party, the regulators. The real fight is always over the same thing: power. And power, as history shows again and again, doesn't disappear. It just changes hands. If this video gave you a different perspective, please subscribe, because history doesn't hide the answers. It only reveals them to those who know how to look.